Sacred Heart ICU in Portland hums with fluorescent lights and the antiseptic smell of bleach on linoleum. 0600 hours. Katie Rodriguez moves through the unit at a pace that looks unhurried but isn't, checking vitals on patients who don't know her name and won't ask. Her scrubs are 2 sizes too large, deliberately. Her hair is pulled so tight it erases her jawline. She's invisible, and she's perfected it. In ICU Bed 7, an Air Force colonel lies dying. His name is James Whitmore. 53 years old. 3 combat tours. His daughter Sarah sits in the visitor's chair, her hand pressed against his, her wedding ring pressing crescent moon indents into his palm. She's been there since midnight. She hasn't slept. The monitors around the bed beep with the rhythm of his failing heart, a sound like a clock counting down to something neither of them can stop. Katie enters the room without announcing herself. The morning shift hasn't officially started. The night nurse will hand off to the day team in 40 minutes, and in that gap between shifts, Katie moves like water, fitting into spaces. She doesn't pull back the curtain. She doesn't make eye contact with Sarah. She simply reaches for the cardiac monitor and begins checking the leads with hands that move with unusual confidence, her fingers tracing the electrode placement like someone reading Braille written in medicine. The colonel's vitals are printed on the monitor in green digital numbers. Blood pressure 78/42. Heart rate 118. Respiratory rate 22. SpO2 88 on high-flow oxygen. Every number is telling a story, but the story the night nurse charted in the computer doesn't match what Katie's reading. The chart says end-stage heart failure. Irreversible. The family should prepare for the worst. Dr. Sterling documented it at 2,300 hours with the finality of a judge's gavel. Katie's left hand trembles slightly as she adjusts the monitor angle. Just a flicker. Just enough to remind her of Ramadi dust storms and the way her hands used to shake after 36-hour surgical shifts in a field hospital made of sandbags and hope. She stops moving and the tremor vanishes. Muscle memory is stronger than fear. Always has been. Is he? Sarah's voice cracks like a child's voice on the edge of something breaking permanently. Katie has heard that voice 1,000 times. It's the voice of someone who has been told to say goodbye and is desperate not to mean it. He's stable for now, Katie says quietly, keeping her eyes on the monitor. Vitals are holding. The night nurse did a good job with the pressors. Sarah's grip on her father's hand tightens. Hope is dangerous in hospitals. Katie knows this. Hope is what makes people fight. Hope is what makes people survive things they shouldn't. But hope is also what makes the landing harder when you fall. Katie leaves the room without turning back. She doesn't need to see Sarah's face to know it has the specific kind of desperation that comes from knowing you're running out of time. She's seen it before. She's lived it before. In a hospital made of concrete and prayers in a city where the sky was the color of rust and the only sound louder than explosions was the absence of them. The ICU corridor is still mostly quiet. Night shift staff move between rooms like ghosts. A ventilator wheezed its mechanical rhythm from bed 3. A code blue alarm trilled from somewhere in the east wing, urgent but not yet desperate. Katie moves to the supply station and begins checking inventory. Saline bags. Epinephrine. Midazolam for sedation. The ritual of checking is a ritual of preparation. In the military, they called it tactical assessment. In hospitals, they called it doing your job. That's when Dr. Sterling arrives. He moves through the ICU like someone walking through his own house, and the nurses part around him without seeming to notice. His Italian loafers don't make a sound on the tile floor. His white coat is pressed with the kind of precision that suggests someone else does his laundry. He's carrying a coffee from the cafeteria in his left hand, untouched, because he brought it to carry, not to drink. Everything about Dr. Sterling is deliberate performance. His gaze sweeps across the unit and lands on Katie with the kind of precision reserved for finding things you're looking for. She's still adjusting the monitor on the colonel's bed. Her back is to the corridor. Her hands are moving across the cardiac leads with a technique he doesn't recognize. It's not the clumsy fumbling of a floor nurse. It's not the tentative exploration of someone afraid to break something expensive. It's practiced. Confident. Military, if he'd known to look for military. But Dr. Sterling doesn't see military. He sees a woman in scrubs 2 sizes too large working in his ICU without the proper credentials. He sees someone who didn't graduate from an accredited nursing program. He sees someone who learned bedside manner from a community college course load and thinks that makes her a nurse. He sees someone he can use. Katie finishes adjusting the monitor and steps back. The colonel's cardiac rhythm displays in green waves across the screen. Sinus tachycardia. Elevated but stable. The pattern is familiar to her in a way that doesn't match her official resume, the one that lists 5 years of experience at Sacred Heart and a nursing degree from a community college in Washington State. The pattern is familiar because she's seen it 1,000 times in field conditions where monitors cost money they didn't have, and you learn to read a patient's body the way you read a tactical map. With your whole mind. With the part of your brain that kept you alive. She turns and sees Dr. Sterling watching her from the corridor. His expression hasn't changed. But something about the angle of his shoulders, the way his coffee cup is held in his left hand like a weapon he might use, tells her this moment matters. Rodriguez, he says. It's not a greeting. It's an identification. That patient is end-stage heart failure. Do not attempt any interventions beyond basic monitoring. Understood? Katie nods. One smooth movement. No argument. No explanation. No eye contact that lasts longer than a pulse check. This is the composure she's built over 15 years of learning that being right and being heard are not the same thing. Understood, doctor. He's waiting for family discussions about comfort care, Sterling continues, and there's something in his voice like satisfaction. Like he's already written the story and is simply waiting for the other characters to catch up to the ending he's chosen. His daughter is in denial. It happens. The end comes for all of us. He turns and walks back toward the nursing station before Katie can respond. Not that she was going to. Katie Rodriguez has learned that the best way to survive working under someone like Dr. Sterling is to be so forgettable they forget to watch you. So compliant that they stop questioning your competence. So quiet that your hands can speak louder than your words ever could. But that wasn't the only observation happening that morning. A man in army dress uniform stands in the ICU visitors area, watching. His name is Davis. He's a combat medic with the 101st Airborne, visiting his cousin in bed 5, and he's been standing in that hallway for 7 minutes, waiting for his cousin to wake from sedation. His eyes are trained to catch details. Details kept him alive in Kandahar. Details matter when a second of inattention can cost a leg or a life. So when he watches Katie move from the colonel's bed to the supply station, he watches her hands. Her hands are wrong for a floor nurse. The calluses are too old. The scars are too deliberate. Her left hand has a surgical scar that runs from her wrist to her knuckle in the pattern of someone who learned to suture under fire, in a tent, with inadequate light and the knowledge that the person on the table would die if she didn't get it right. Her right hand has a fade mark where a wedding ring lived for exactly 2,847 days before she took it off and never put another one on. But the thing that makes Davis freeze is the way she's holding the cardiac monitor leads. The way she's positioning them. It's not textbook. It's not how they teach it in nursing school. It's how medics in Ramadi taught it in 2006, when a proper medical facility was a memory and improvisation was the difference between a save and a body bag. It's the field suture pattern. The Ramadi position. The way you hold things when you learn to hold them while explosions are teaching you about mortality. Davis takes a step toward the supply station. Katie has already moved away. She's checking medication cart locks, her movements methodical, her attention seemingly elsewhere. But he saw it. He knows what he saw. Hands don't lie like that. Hands remember things brains try to forget. The morning shift change happens at 0700. The night nurses hand off to the day team in rapid-fire report, vitals, and medications and family situations delivered in the compressed language of people who have done this 10,000 times. Katie stands at the back of the group, not writing anything down, not asking clarifications. Just listening. Just absorbing. Her hand trembles again, just slightly, and this time nobody sees it because everyone is reading their tablets and checking their phones and preparing to own the next 8 hours. When the meeting disperses, Katie walks to her locker in the break room. It's a standard hospital locker, painted grey, labelled with a tape name strip that reads Kate Rodriguez. Inside is a change of clothes for after shift. A coffee thermos. A single photograph in a frame that nobody's ever asked about. And on the bottom, wrapped carefully in newspaper yellowed from age, is a pair of worn combat boots. The leather is cracked from desert sun. The soles are reinforced with field repairs. The laces are still tied the way she left them on a tarmac in 2008, and she's never retied them since. They're not for wearing. They're for remembering. They're evidence. Katie closes the locker and locks it. 0715 hours. Morning round start in 15 minutes. Dr. Sterling will walk the unit with his entourage of residents and interns, and Katie will move out of the way before he arrives. She will make notes. She will speak only when spoken to. She will be the kind of nurse that disappears into the background until you need her, and then she'll be the only thing you're looking at. The fluorescent lights buzz overhead like something trapped trying to escape. Rain hammers against the ICU windows like applause for a performance nobody wanted to watch. Somewhere on the 3rd floor, a monitor alarms. Somewhere in bed 7, the colonel's heart struggles against the weight of fluid that's filling his chest cavity, pressing against his heart like a hand slowly closing, and nobody in this hospital knows that Katie Rodriguez knows exactly how to solve that problem. Nobody knows that she's solved it before. Nobody knows what those hands in the 2 large scrubs are capable of doing when the moment arrives and the choice becomes simple: follow protocol or save a life. The moment is coming. It's not today. It's not today, but it's close enough to smell. It's close enough that Katie can feel the old knowledge waking up inside her, the parts of herself she buried when she put on civilian scrubs and decided that staying alive meant staying invisible. She sits in the break room with a cup of coffee and a granola bar she won't eat. A resident walks in, sees her, and walks back out without saying anything. That's the strategy working. That's the years of practice paying off. But at the locker beside hers, someone is opening their door. Someone is grabbing their badge. Someone is looking at the worn combat boot sitting in Katie's locker, and his mind is doing the work of recognition. Combat Medic Davis knows what he's looking at. He knows the pattern. He knows the hands. He doesn't know the name yet, but he knows the skill. And he knows that in a hospital, skill like that is dangerous. Skill like that is either going to save someone or cost someone their career. Probably both. Morning rounds at Sacred Heart move with the mechanical precision of a clock nobody wound. Dr. Sterling leads the procession, 2 residents trailing like remoras behind a shark, charts clutched like shields. His voice carries the particular confidence of a man who has never been wrong, or at least never admitted it. The colonel's room is the 3rd stop, and the machines speak before anyone does. The ventilator wheezed its mechanical rhythm. Blood pressure creeping downward. O2 saturation holding at 91%. The ejection fraction had dropped 3 points since yesterday. Katie stands at the foot of the bed, reviewing the overnight labs. She's been awake since 4 in the morning, unable to sleep, unable to stop thinking about those hands. The combat medic from yesterday had recognized something. She'd deflected with YouTube, a lie so thin it might as well have been glass, but he'd let it go. They always do, eventually. What matters now is the colonel, whose daughter Sarah sits in the corner chair with her arms wrapped around herself like she's holding something together that wants to fall apart. Sterling glances at the monitors and turns to the residents. Classic end-stage heart failure. We've given him 72 hours. Time to start the conversation about comfort measures. He's already writing in the chart, his pen moving with the finality of a judge's gavel. Family meeting tomorrow afternoon. We'll discuss DNR status and withdrawal of support. Katie's hands tighten on the clipboard. The data has been speaking all night, a language she learned in sandstorm field hospitals where you had seconds to read a patient and minutes to save a life. Declining blood pressure wasn't failure. The distended neck veins, the muffled heart sounds, the way the monitors painted a picture of external compression rather than cardiac weakness, these were words in a very specific sentence. Her voice comes out quiet, professional, the voice of someone who knows exactly how small she is supposed to be. Doctor, the patient's vitals suggest reversible cardiac tamponade rather than cardiogenic shock. The pericardial fluid accumulation on yesterday's echo showed. Sterling stops mid-sentence. The resident stopped breathing. Sarah's head snaps up. Sterling turns slowly, his eyes moving across Katie with the look of a man who has just discovered a stain on his suit jacket. Did you attend medical school overnight, Ms. Rodriguez? Because I was not aware our hiring standards had changed so dramatically. The question hangs in the air like a blade. Katie's jaw tightens. One measured breath. She keeps her eyes on the monitors, on the colonel's face, anywhere but Sterling's face, because she knows what will come next and she will not give him the satisfaction of flinching. This is what happens when we lower hiring standards, Sterling announces, loud enough that a nurse from the adjacent room glances through the glass partition. A community college graduate playing doctor with a decorated officer's life. He looks directly at Sarah, his voice taking on a patronizing softness that somehow sounds worse than anger. Some people don't understand the difference between changing bedpans and making life or death decisions. That's why we have physicians. Sarah's face crumples. The colonel, drifting in and out of sedation, doesn't react. The ventilator continues its wheeze, indifferent to hierarchy. Katie sets the clipboard down on the edge of the bed. Her hands are steady, a technical achievement requiring the suppression of every instinct her body is screaming. One tear moves down her right cheek, a small thing, almost incidental. She wipes it away with the back of her hand without breaking eye contact with Sterling. I've seen good men die from bad calls before, Doctor. Sterling's face darkens. Not with shame, he doesn't know shame, but with the particular rage of a man whose authority has been questioned in front of witnesses. He turns back to the residents and continues rounds as if Katie is furniture. But his hands shake slightly as he writes in the chart. That's when you know you've made an enemy of someone with access to institutional power. When they start thinking about ways to make you disappear. By 10:45 hours, the write-up appears on the unit board in the break room. A laminated sheet, official letterhead from Sacred Heart Administration. Katie Rodriguez. Disciplinary action. The charges are written in the particular language of bureaucracy designed to sound both petty and catastrophic, insubordination and practicing beyond scope of practice. Sterling's signature sits at the bottom, perfectly formed, the handwriting of a man who has learned to make his authority look elegant. Nurses pass it without stopping. Most of them already know. Hospital news moves faster than blood through a heart. At 1,400 hours, Katie enters the break room. The smell of stale coffee and someone's heated leftover lasagna hangs in the air like a warning. For nurses are there, Linda from nights, Marcus from day shift, Teresa from recovery, and Jeff from the ICU charge desk. Good nurses. Nurses who have worked 3 shifts in a row to cover gaps. Nurses who know what it costs to stand between a patient and a bad outcome. Katie opens the refrigerator to grab her lunch, a sandwich wrapped in foil, and turns to the table where they're gathered. They move together, a coordinated silence. Coffee cups rise. Chairs scrape backward. The door clicks shut behind them before Katie can even set her sandwich down. The break room settles into a quiet that feels like weight, like pressure, like something pressing down on her chest from all sides. She sits alone at the table. Unwraps her sandwich. Eats with mechanical precision because the alternative is to acknowledge what just happened, and acknowledging it means it's real. The tremor comes back to her left hand. Small at first. Then stronger. Not fear, she's learned the difference between fear and something else, something deeper. Fear is fast. This is slow. This is the body-keeping score of every time you've been told you don't belong. Sterling passes the glass window 15 minutes later. He sees her sitting alone, and his smile is worth more to him than any patient outcome could ever be. Isolation is a tool. He's learning to use it. That afternoon, a shadow appears in the doorway of the Colonel's room. A man in his early 40s, wearing a visitor's pass clipped to a polo shirt, watching Katie adjust the chest tube dressing with the kind of focused attention that belongs to someone trained in the language of wounds. The combat medic from yesterday. Davis. His uncle is 2 rooms down, recovering from hip surgery, but he's not here for his uncle. He's been watching Katie move through the ICU all morning, watching her respond to Sterling's public evisceration without breaking form, watching her hands work with the practiced efficiency of someone who has done this in places where mistakes meant bodies. That's a Ramadi field suture pattern, he says, his voice careful and quiet. Where did you learn that? Katie's hands stop moving. Just for a moment. Long enough that Davis sees it. Her voice comes out flat, deflective, the voice of someone closing a door. YouTube. Davis frowns. He's attended enough medical schools to know what competence looks like, and YouTube doesn't teach you to stitch a collapsed artery closed with exactly 4 sutures in exactly the configuration she just used on a suppurating wound. But he nods, steps back, and walks away, leaving Katie with her secret sitting in her chest like shrapnel that never quite healed. But that wasn't the worst part. Sterling had made his phone call to Portland Community College that morning. The call was brief, professional, and devastating. He asked about Katie's performance records. Had there been any concerning incidents? Any patterns of overstepping? The college administrator, eager to be helpful to a prominent physician, began reviewing old evaluations. A clinical supervisor had noted that Katie asked too many questions during patient care rounds. She'd challenged an instructor's assessment of a case study. She'd suggested alternative protocols in a group discussion. None of it rose to the level of a formal complaint, but together, they painted a picture of someone who didn't understand her place in the hierarchy. By evening, an email circulates through Sacred Heart's department heads. Scope creep and professional boundaries. Dr. Sterling, the email says, is concerned about nursing staff attempting to perform diagnostic functions. The email doesn't mention Katie by name, but every nurse in the building knows exactly who it's about. The message is clear: this is what happens when you step out of line. The next morning, Katie arrives for her shift to find a note clipped to her assignment sheet. She's being transferred to post-surgical recovery on a different floor. Change of assignment for optimal staffing distribution, the note says, initialed by Sterling. She won't see the Colonel again. Sarah, the Colonel's daughter, asks where Katie went. A charge nurse answers quietly, carefully, the way people speak when they're delivering bad news. Dr. Sterling felt a change would be better for your father. That night, Katie stands in the hospital parking lot beside her 2008 Honda Civic with rust spreading across the lower left panel like a slow infection. The ICU windows glow 3 floors above her. Inside those windows, a man she could have saved is being told he's going to die. Inside those windows, a doctor is closing a file with her name on it. She opens her trunk and looks at the cardboard box sitting in the darkness. Navy medical kit. Surgical instrument she hasn't touched in 2 years. Field dressings. Medications with long names. A pair of worn combat boots, the leather creased and stained with sand that never quite washed out completely. She chose this, the anonymity, the small nursing job, the quiet that comes from disappearing. She chose to heal without being seen, to save lives without being known. She has not told anyone where she is. Not her sister in Seattle. Not her former commanding officer. Not even the VA hospital where she's supposed to check in but hasn't, because checking in means explaining, and explaining means they'll ask her to come back. Katie reaches for the box. Her hand hovers above it. Then she closes the trunk without touching anything inside, and walks back into the hospital like a woman carrying a weight that only she can feel. Her phone buzzes at 2 in the morning. Katie's eyes snap open in the darkness of her studio apartment, that trained military reflex that turned sleep into alertness in a single breath. The text is from Davis, Colonel crashing. On-call doc 20-minute out. Sterling left orders, comfort care only. No intervention. She doesn't read it twice. She moves. Sweatpants under scrubs. No shower. No coffee. Boots laced in the dark with the kind of efficiency that comes from doing it 1,000 times in places where slow was deadly. 11 minutes later, she's walking through the emergency entrance of Sacred Heart, and the night air still clings to her skin like a reminder that some people never really leave the waiting room. The ICU is too bright. Fluorescent lights that hum like insects trapped in glass, and Katie registers the sound the way she once registered incoming artillery, as information that mattered. The colonel's monitor displays Beck's triad on the screen, elevated JVP, muffled heart sounds, hypertension creeping downward like a predator stalking prey. The fluid compressing his heart chambers isn't guessing. It's mathematics. It's physics. It's exactly what Katie predicted 3 days ago, and Dr. Sterling chose comfort care. Amy, the night nurse, barely 3 years out of Portland Community College, hands shaking like she's holding water in a sieve, stands at the bedside. Crying. Not silently. The kind of tears that come from knowing someone is dying and being ordered to do nothing about it. Sarah is there. The colonel's daughter. She's gripping her father's hand so hard her knuckles are white as bone, and she's begging. Actually begging. Please. Please someone do something. He's not breathing right. Listen to him. Please. The colonel's respirations are shallow. Labored. His oxygen saturation is sliding 88, 86, 84, and Katie watches the monitors the way a sniper watches a scope. Every number is a story. Every downward trend is a clock counting backward. Sterling's orders are clear, Amy whispers. Comfort care only. No resuscitation. No invasive procedures. He said to keep him comfortable. Katie's jaw tightens. Not visible. Just the smallest muscle movement at the hinge of her face, and then it's gone. Control. Composure. The kind that comes from having made decisions in sandstorms where crying wasn't an option because there were 147 Marines depending on your steady hands. Where's the on-call physician? Katie's voice is flat. Informational. Not a question. A status request. Beaverton. Traffic from the accident on IU-5. 18 minutes now? Maybe more. The colonel's heart rate drops to 42. Sarah makes a sound that isn't quite a word, a mother's sound, the sound of someone watching their parent disappear and having no power to stop it. The monitor shows the descent, 40. 38, the rhythm is slowing toward something worse, and Katie can feel the seconds tightening like a tourniquet. Davis appears at her shoulder. The 101st Airborne medic with the hands that recognize hands, and he says it quietly, for words that sound like an order, you know what he needs. Katie turns to look at him, and there's something in her eyes that isn't resignation. It's something harder. Something that looks like certainty. I know what I'm not allowed to do. But she's already moving toward the ICU door. The lock is manual. Brass. It clicks with the kind of finality that sounds different at 2 in the morning, louder, more deliberate, the kind of sound that echoes in small spaces. Katie turns it. The mechanism catches. The door seals. It's a quiet act. It's not violent. It's not dramatic. It's just a woman locking a door while her patient's daughter watches her father's oxygen fall to 81. And a night nurse stands frozen because she understands, in that moment, exactly who she's been standing next to for 3 days. Call me when the on-call doctor arrives, Katie says. She doesn't look at Amy. She doesn't look at Sarah. She looks at Davis, and she says 8-minute window. Maybe less. The supply cart is beside the crash bay. Katie's hands move like they're not attached to her anymore, like they belong to someone else's nervous system, someone who spent 11 hours alone in a field hospital in Ramadi, keeping people alive with equipment that wasn't meant for this and hands that became the only thing between breathing and not. She reaches for the sterile pericardiocentesis kit. 14-gauge needle. A syringe that looks small enough to hold nothing but looks large enough to hold everything when you understand what it does. Betadine. Chlorhexidine. Sterile drapes that unfold like a ritual older than hospitals. The colonel's stats are deteriorating. His blood pressure is 80/51. The breath sounds are muffled now, dampened by fluid that's building pressure around his heart like a fist slowly closing. His oxygen is 78. The numbers are speaking, and Katie hears them in a language that only people who've watched people die really understand. Sarah's voice comes through the intercom. What's happening? What are you doing? Katie doesn't answer yet. She's moving to the bedside, positioning herself at the colonel's left shoulder with the kind of stance that comes from training in places where you had to be prepared to do everything yourself. She's already prepped his skin in a pattern that would look random to anyone who hasn't done this before, concentric circles of betadine spreading outward like a ritual. The smell of antiseptic fills the small space, sharp and clinical, cutting through the recirculated hospital air. Katie. Sarah's voice through the intercom is louder now. Katie, what are you doing to my father? Saving his life, Katie says. Her voice doesn't carry emotion. It carries information. Every step. I'm going to tell you every step. So you know exactly what's happening. So you know your father's heart is being saved by something real. Katie's hands find the ribs. The fourth intercostal space. The anatomy drawn in her mind from 1,000 hours of study and 100 hours of actual application on bodies that were bleeding and broken and didn't have time for gentleness. Her fingers measure the distance. The needle is poised. The angle is everything. I'm placing the needle at the fifth intercostal space, Katie says, and her voice carries weight now, the kind of weight that comes from someone who knows exactly what she's doing. Just below the rib. Just above the fluid that's compressing his heart. The needle will go in, and it will find the fluid, and when it does, we'll draw that fluid out. That's all. That's the procedure. The needle slides in with the kind of pressure that feels like breaking through skin and muscle and rib and the pericardial sac itself, and Katie's hands are steady as surgical lasers, and there's a moment, a single moment, where everything holds its breath. And then the syringe fills with fluid. Straw-colored. Fluid that shouldn't be there. Fluid that's been compressing the chambers of his heart, stealing his ability to pump, killing him in slow mathematics. It's working, Katie says. The fluid is coming out. Your father's heart is no longer being compressed. Feel his pulse, Sarah. Feel how it's changing. The monitors are climbing. The heart rate moving upward toward normal. 48, 52. 58, the blood pressure rising like a boat being lifted by the tide. 88/55. 94/62. The oxygen saturation moving back toward something that won't kill him. 82, 86. 91. The colonel's respirations deepen. His breath sounds clear suddenly, and Amy is watching like she's witnessing something she doesn't have permission to see but understands she's supposed to remember forever. Katie continues to drain the fluid. Slow. Methodical. The kind of pace that comes from experience in places where rushing killed people just as surely as hesitation did. The syringe fills and empties and fills again, and with each withdrawal, the colonel's physiology rewrites itself. His pressures normalize. His oxygen climbs. His rhythm becomes steady, not dramatic, not miraculous, just the sound of a heart that's finally able to do what it was designed to do. His heart is strong, Katie says to Sarah, and there's something in her voice now that sounds almost gentle. His rhythm is normal sinus. His pressure is stable. Your father is going to live. Because his heart was never failing. It was just trapped. She secures the line with tape and gauze, and her hands move with the precision of someone placing something sacred. The monitors display numbers that read like redemption. The colonel's breathing becomes deep, becomes regular, becomes the breathing of a man whose body has been given back to him. And then, in the silence that follows, Davis says quietly, "That's beautiful work, Senior Chief." The words hang in the fluorescent light like a weight that only Katie understands. She doesn't acknowledge him. She doesn't explain. She simply completes the documentation, noting the fluid drainage, the procedure steps, the outcome, the time. 0247 hours. 8 minutes from start to finish. The colonel is alive because someone with nothing left to lose decided that protocols written by men who've never held a sandstorm field hospital alone weren't stronger than hands that remember how to save people. But that wasn't the worst part. By morning, Dr. Sterling would activate something far worse than humiliation. He would activate his network, 3 board members who golfed at his club, a call to the nursing school requesting her file, and an outside investigator reviewing her credentials. He would move with the precision of a man who understood that the woman who just locked him out of his authority had to be removed before anyone realized who she actually was. By 0700 hours, Dr. Sterling was already working the phones. His office door closed. His voice clipped and precise. The 3 board members who golfed at Riverside Country Club received personal calls before their coffee went cold. A floor nurse performed an unauthorized invasive procedure. Cardiac tamponade drainage. Without physician authorization. Without attending present. I have documentation. The pause while they listened. The slow, careful agreement that this required investigation. That credentials needed review. That liability exposure was enormous. By 0730, he was calling Portland Community College. He asked for the Dean of Nursing. He requested Katie Rodriguez's academic file, her clinical evaluations, her performance records. "I have concerns about her scope of practice," he said. "Her training may have been inadequate for acute care settings. I need to verify her foundational knowledge before we proceed with any institutional response." The dean promised to send records within the hour. Sterling thanked her with the warmth of a man who understood how institutions protected themselves when one of their graduates became a liability. By 0745, an outside investigator named Harold Voss received an email from Sacred Heart's legal counsel. 3 pages of Sterling's typed complaints. Katie Rodriguez's credentialing file was flagged for independent review. Unauthorized procedures. Scope of practice violations. Possible falsification of training records. Voss was good at his job. He'd reviewed 47 nurses over the past 5 years. 46 of them had lost their licenses. He opened his calendar and scheduled a site visit for that afternoon. The morning shift gathered for report at 0700. 23 nurses, respiratory therapists, aides. Katie stood at the back of the conference room in scrubs still damp from last night's crisis, her name badge clipped to her waistband. She'd worked 47 hours in the past 60. Her hands had moved through another human being's chest cavity 8 hours ago. The colonel's daughter had wept against her shoulder. The monitor had climbed from flatline to 62 beats per minute. Sinus rhythm. Dr. Sterling entered at 0750. He was freshly showered. His tie was pressed. His jaw was set like a man who had made decisions and now watched them execute. "Ms. Rodriguez," he said. The room contracted around those 2 words. "My office. Now." She followed him down the hallway. Fluorescent lights hummed above. Her boots made no sound on the tile. Other staff members turned away as they passed, already understanding what was coming. The news traveled faster than blood pressure. By the time they reached his office, everyone on the unit knew. Katie was done. "Close the door," Sterling said. She did. "You performed a pericardiocentesis on a patient. Without authorization. Without a physician present. In direct violation of my explicit orders to withdraw life support." He opened a file. Her personnel record. Already thick with notes. This is not your first documented boundary violation. According to the college, your training history is questionable. Your scope of practice extends to bedside assessment. Not invasive procedures. Not decision-making that supersedes physician orders. Katie said nothing. Her hands rested on her thighs, palms down. You've created enormous liability for this institution. A patient operated on without consent. A procedure performed by someone whose credentials don't authorize it. I've already reported this to the nursing board. The state is sending an investigator. He pulled a badge from his desk drawer. Her badge. You're terminated, effective immediately. Unauthorized procedures. Insubordination. Practicing beyond your scope of license. The badge made a soft metallic sound when he set it on the desk between them. Security will escort you out. You have 30 minutes to collect your personal belongings from your locker. Nothing else leaves this building. You understand me? Katie's eyes moved from the badge to Sterling's face. Held there. No tremor. No flush. No crack in her voice when she spoke. The colonel's alive, she said. That's not your concern anymore. She stood. Turned. Walked to the door. Sterling called after her. This is what happens when arrogance masquerades as compassion, he said. You think you're a hero. You're a delusional floor nurse who just destroyed her career. The door closed behind her with a soft click. The veteran nurses were waiting in the break room when she entered. They saw her face and looked away immediately. One of them, Linda, who'd been nice to her on the first day, suddenly became very interested in her coffee. Nobody spoke. The silence was so complete you could hear the refrigerator's compressor cycling, the fluorescent lights humming their endless hum, the distant sound of an ambulance siren wailing through Portland's morning traffic. Katie moved through the unit toward the locker room. The day shift watched her pass. Some with pity. Some with fear. One younger nurse, couldn't have been more than 24, mouthed the word sorry. Katie didn't acknowledge it. Couldn't. The moment she acknowledged the apology, the reality would become permanent. Her locker was the same as it had been that first morning. Cheap metal. Combination lock. Inside, 3 pairs of backup scrubs, a photo of her sister in dress blues, a half-empty bottle of ibuprofen, a pair of worn combat boots she'd finally brought from home after 6 months of working this unit. The boots were desert tan with creases from years of patrol routes through Ramadi's Jolan district. They were broken in at the heels. The laces had been replaced twice. The sole of the left boot showed a neat stitch line where shrapnel had torn through, and she'd had a medic named Garrison patch it with field suture. They were the only thing she'd kept from that life. Everything else, the dress uniform, the medals, the photos, stayed in a storage unit in Gresham, locked behind a door she didn't open. She pulled them out now. Held them for a moment. The leather was stiff from being crammed in a locker for 6 months. The smell came up, dust and gun oil and something else. Memory. Senior Chief. She turned. A young security guard named Marcus. Not the one who'd escorted her from Sterling's office. This one looked like he wanted to say something. His mouth opened. Closed. He looked away. I've got to walk you out, he said finally. Katie placed the boots in the cardboard box. The scrubs. The photo. The ibuprofen. She held the box against her ribs. 22 pounds of her entire life at Sacred Heart ICU. She'd planned to stay for 5 years. Build some stability. Become someone else entirely. She'd lasted 6 months. The hallway outside the locker room was empty. Most of the day shift had dispersed to begin their shifts. She heard the colonel's monitor beeping from his room as she passed. Steady rhythm. Strong rate. He was sleeping. His daughter had gone home at dawn, finally understanding that her father would survive, that there was a future now that included his presence in it. The employee exit was at the far end of the corridor, the one nobody used during the day. Marcus walked behind her, his radio clipped to his belt. Neither of them spoke. The box grew heavier with each step, or maybe it was just that the weight was becoming real now. Permanent. The boots inside felt like evidence of a crime she couldn't name. The door opened to a parking lot. October rain hammered down like bullets. The kind of Portland rain that didn't fall so much as a tack. It soaked through her scrub top immediately. The box grew damp. She didn't run to her car. Just walked. One foot in front of the other. The box held level. Her jaw clenched so hard it ached, but her eyes stayed dry. By 1400 hours, Katie was sitting in a waiting room at the Veterans Affairs Medical Center in northeast Portland. The walls were beige. The magazines were from 2019. The intake form in her lap asked about PTSD symptoms, service-connected disabilities, deployments, trauma history. She'd filled out 7 of these forms over the past 6 years. This was the 8th. Each one felt like a confession. The waiting room was populated with men in faded unit shirts. A 173rd Airborne patch on one. The Ranger tab on another. A Vietnam-era Marine Corps bulldog tattooed on an old man's neck. They all had the same expression, the particular exhaustion of people who'd spent years trying to return to a normal that no longer existed. A woman next to her was reading a paperback. The cover showed a woman with a sword. Heroes Never Die, the title read. Katie almost laughed. Almost. She didn't have the energy for irony. Rodriguez, Katie. A nurse called from the intake desk. Katie stood. The box was still in her lap. She'd kept it with her all day. At home in her apartment. In her car. Everywhere. The boots inside felt heavier than the rest of the world. That afternoon, the thought crystallized as she sat across from the VA intake counselor, this is what you are now. This is what you've become. Another broken soldier who couldn't save herself. You fixed a colonel. You saved his life with hands that have held 1,000 lives together. And you couldn't even save your own career. You didn't even try. You just accepted the fall the way you've accepted everything else. In silence. In isolation. In the certainty that you don't deserve better. The boots in that cardboard box were the only evidence left. Proof that she'd once been someone else. Proof that she'd held authority. Proof that she'd known how to lead. Now they were just old leather and memory. Evidence of a life she had no right to claim. Evidence of failure. The intake counselor was asking about suicidal ideation. Katie said she was fine. 3 days later, an emergency case arrived at Sacred Heart unconscious, wheeled through the automatic doors on a stretcher that squeaked like a wounded animal. Male, 50s, facial scar running from temple to jawline like a lightning bolt frozen in time. The attending physician didn't recognize him. The residents didn't recognize him. But Katie Rodriguez, standing at the medication cart in the ICU hallway, felt her hands go absolutely still. She knew that scar. She had stitched that scar closed in 2006 in a field hospital in Ramadi with sand in her teeth and incoming mortar fire rattling the corrugated metal walls. The man on that stretcher had walked in carrying a loaded AK-47, and she had talked him down using 3 words of Arabic and the kind of calm that only comes from having already survived the worst. His name was Jamal. He had become a translator. And he was supposed to be dead, killed in a sectarian shooting in 2008, or so the intelligence report said. But he was breathing. Katie moved toward the trauma bay with the precision of muscle memory, her body understanding before her mind caught up. The attending was already running vitals, calling for a CT scan, shouting orders about chest trauma and possible internal bleeding. Katie read the board in one glance. Blunt force injury. Vehicle accident. Stable for now, but the kind of stable that collapses without warning. She didn't speak. She positioned herself at the patient's left side and watched his face as the nurses prepped him for imaging. His eyes were closed. his breathing shallow but present. The monitors beat their mechanical rhythm, a heartbeat that had somehow survived 2 decades of chaos. Then Jamal's eyes opened. For 3 seconds, there was nothing. Just the hum of machines and the fluorescent lights overhead casting everything in their sterile glow. Then his gaze found her face, and something shifted in his expression: recognition, disbelief, gratitude, all compressed into a single moment. "Auntie," he whispered in Arabic. The word he had called her in that field hospital. The word meant protector, sister, savior. "Auntie." Again, louder this time, his eyes locked on hers as the trauma team wheeled him toward the CT scanner. The room went dead silent. Every nurse in that trauma bay heard it. Every resident, every attending, every person who had spent the last 4 days treating Katie Rodriguez like she was invisible. They heard the word. They saw his face. They saw her face, and the recognition that passed between them like electricity. The attending turned slowly. "You know this patient?" Katie's voice came out steady. "From a long time ago." What she didn't say: "I held a field hospital alone for 11 hours under fire while he bled on my stretcher." What she didn't say: "I taught him how to apply a tourniquet so he could save his own life." What she didn't say: "I am the reason he is alive right now." She didn't need to say it. 20 minutes later, the colonel's daughter Sarah appeared in the hospital lobby. She had been visiting her father in his recovery room when she heard the commotion, the whispers, the sudden shift in how people looked at the ICU nurse who had been treated like furniture for days. Sarah walked directly to where a cluster of staff members had gathered near the admitting desk, and she said it loudly enough for everyone in a 30-foot radius to hear. "You saved my father, Senior Chief." The room went so quiet you could hear the rain against the glass doors outside. The storm had rolled in that morning, drumming on the windows like applause for something everyone had gotten wrong. Sarah stood there in her hospital badge. She was a resident, emergency medicine, looking directly at Katie with tears running down her face. Not tears of sadness. Tears of understanding. "You saved his life when everyone else wanted him to die," Sarah said. "When Dr. Sterling said we should let him go. You locked that door. You stayed. Her voice caught. You brought him back." A nurse standing nearby, Marcus Chen, the one who had abandoned Katie in the break room 4 days ago, suddenly moved toward the admitting station. His hands were shaking as he pulled up the colonel's full file on the computer. His jaw worked silently for a moment, then he began to read aloud. His voice cracked on the second line. "Navy Cross citation. Katie Rodriguez, Senior Chief Petty Officer, United States Navy." Marcus stopped, looked at Katie, then continued reading. "For extraordinary heroism in connection with combat operations in Ramadi Province, Iraq. Patient held a field medical facility under direct enemy fire for 11 consecutive hours. Patient treated 37 personnel with limited supplies and no backup. Patient coordinated emergency casualty evacuation while maintaining facility operations under constant mortar and small arms fire." Marcus's voice dropped to almost a whisper. Patient exceeded the scope of emergency medicine practice in ways that saved multiple lives, including the preservation of critical casualties who would have been lost under standard protocol. This action is recognized as the highest standard of combat medicine excellence and personal courage under fire. He looked up from the screen. "This is you." Katie didn't answer. She didn't need to. That's when the man stepped forward from the crowd that had started to gather. He was older, maybe 65, with the bearing of someone who had spent decades making life-and-death decisions. He wore jeans and a rain jacket, but his eyes held the clarity of command. "I'm retired," he said, his voice like a Black Hawk helicopter idling in a hangar, low, powerful, impossible to ignore. 32 years in. SEAL Team 3, Charlie Platoon. I knew your work in CENTCOM. Everyone knew your work. You trained half the special operations medics we deployed. 2 Purple Hearts. Combat Action Ribbon. And that Navy Cross." He paused, looking directly at Katie. "The Distinguished Service Medal came after, didn't it?" After Ramadi. Katie's composure never wavered. But something shifted in her shoulders, the smallest straightening, as if the weight she had been carrying for 4 days suddenly had a name. "Yes, sir," she said. 8 words. A full sentence. The first time anyone had heard her speak with complete authority since she had locked that ICU door. The retired SEAL smiled. It was the smile of someone who had finally found what he had been looking for. "There you are," he said quietly. "There you are." That's when Dr. Sterling emerged from the corridor leading to the administrative offices. He stopped when he saw the gathering, the crowd, the daughter, the retired SEAL, the nurse reading Katie's full military file with tears streaming down his face. For 3 seconds, his mouth opened as if to speak. No sound came out. His face went a color that didn't have a name, somewhere between rage and the understanding that his entire world had just collapsed. He tried to step forward. The retired SEAL moved slightly to the left, blocking his path with his shoulder, a gesture so subtle that only someone trained in violence would recognize it as a threat. Dr. Sterling's mouth closed. That's when the doors to the administrative corridor opened again, and Dr. Okoye, the chief medical officer, walked through with 2 security officers and a human resources representative. She was carrying a cardboard box. The same kind of cardboard box that had held Katie's belongings 4 days ago. The same kind that Dr. Sterling himself had ordered packed. Dr. Okoye didn't speak. She simply handed the box to Dr. Sterling. "I believe you know the way out, sir." He took the box. His hands were shaking. He looked around the lobby, at the colonel's daughter, at the retired SEAL, at the nurse holding Katie's Navy Cross citation, at Katie herself standing perfectly still with her hands at her sides and her voice steady as a surgical laser. He opened his mouth one more time. Closed it. Then he walked toward the exit, the rain beginning to fall harder against the glass as he pushed through the automatic doors. 6 months later, someone spotted him at a community college in Gresham, teaching CPR certification classes for minimum wage to students who didn't know who he was. He lived in a studio apartment now. His wife had taken their daughter to Eugene. His medical licenses had been suspended pending investigation. The board members he had called, the 3 men who golfed at Riverside Country Club and promised to have his back, suddenly had no memory of those conversations. Meanwhile, at Sacred Heart, the main atrium had been transformed for a ceremony. 3 Oregon veterans stood at the front in their dress uniforms, waiting to receive commendations. One was a colonel. Another was an Air Force pilot. The third was a refugee translator who had become a U.S. citizen and now worked with refugee services. Katie stood beside the colonel in her own dress blues, senior chief petty officer insignia on her sleeve. Her left hand was steady as she saluted. The tremor was gone. The weight was distributed differently now, not on her shoulders, but in her chest, in the center where duty lives and never leaves. In a glass case behind them, displayed on burgundy velvet, were her worn combat boots from Ramadi. Next week they would be shipped to the Smithsonian as part of a permanent exhibit on field medicine in contemporary warfare. The boots that had walked through sand and blood and impossible choices. The boots that had carried her out of one war and delivered her to another she never expected to fight. Sarah hugged her and whispered, "You gave me my father back." The Iraqi translator approached slowly, still healing from his injuries but moving with purpose. "You saved me twice," he said in English, his accent still carrying the shape of Ramadi. "Once in 2006. Again last week. I don't have words." Katie's hand touched his shoulder. "You chose to live. That's the hard part. I just helped with the medical piece." The cameras flashed. The local news had turned out for this, the story of the decorated Navy medic fired for saving a patient's life, then vindicated when her military record emerged. It was the kind of story that restored faith in something, though no one could quite articulate what. As the crowd dispersed, a young nurse, maybe 24, fresh from a community college nursing program, approached Katie nervously. Her badge identified her as Rebecca Walsh, RN, 3 weeks into her first ICU rotation. "I'm sorry to bother you," Rebecca said quietly. but I was wondering about combat medical training. I want to learn what you did. How you stayed so calm when everyone else was panicking." Katie looked at her, really looked at her, and saw herself 12 years ago, before Ramadi, before the field hospital, before she understood what her hands were capable of. "Let me tell you about Ramadi," Katie said. And she did. Heroes walk among us. Sometimes in scrub, saving lives in the dark. If you've made it this far, thank you for staying with Katie's story. Please subscribe for more tales of the people nobody sees until everything changes. Like and comment if you know someone like Katie, someone whose quiet strength changed everything. And if you're thinking about a career in medicine or the military, Katie's path is just one of millions. Your story matters too.